And I will share my screen with the prayers so we can begin. Again, if you need the prayers in French, Spanish, Chinese, they're available on the resources page.
Kulong Changshu Chodo Tuke Basal Tap Ne Kunje number Dabadang Song the Delte Dambushi Simbershu.
Please listen to the teachings of the genuine Dharma with a union of perfectly pure conduct and the perfectly pure motivation of supreme bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, vividly present to mind.
Dela Gang Simberje Shegi Rimba Jungle Lodro Taigi Sung Lama Kyanggu ki Sildip Mugu Ningi Sirdip Tela any Sundip Rimba Sum Yabale Sildip Rimba Dambo Tene Devi Indian Lama Namgi Indian Chess Tembe Kone any Lama Dantave Lama Dang Nyambe Kopang Devi Indian Tobala Jingi Labar Soa Deve Soldibrimba Tangbo de Gong Shizine Da Soldib Girimba Niba Debu di Tubji Gitap Lamgi Indianam Jula Kyor Jingi Labar Soa Deve Sulshigre.
Of all the possible topics of the Dharma to which we could be listening, our topic is the text by Janggon Khenpo Lodro Tai called Devotion That Pierces the Heart, a supplication for calling the Guru from afar. In this text consisting of 3 parts, we've completed the explanation of the first part, which relates how to engage in the supplication for a blessing with respect to recollecting the excellent qualities of the fruition possessed by the Guru and seeking to attain an equal fruition for ourselves. We pray for blessings. Now we've arrived at the second part of this text, which is an explanation of the supplication for blessings by means of giving rise in our mind stream to a supplication to the Guru to attain the object to be realized, the state of fruition.
All that Dilla Lamgi Yundin Gula Kyola Jingi Labar Soa Debe Sundip Rimba Mangoyore Karre Lanadine Lamgi Nyamningi Rimba Mangoyora or Di Nani Tangshu the Garlamnadine Nijung Kyor that Lamgi Sawa the Nijung Ra Lam Tamji Sawa the Nijung or Di Nandine Dambu Nijung Kyola Jingi Labar Soa Deba.
This section on supplicating for the blessing of developing the excellent qualities of the path in our mind stream, activating them in our mind stream, has very many parts to it. And the reason for that is that the path of practice has very many parts to it. So when we look at the various stages set forth here, the first is renunciation, which I translate as reorientation of the mind. And why is that? Reorientation of the mind is the root source of all paths. It's the source of the path in general. So first, we supplicate for the blessing of developing reorientation of mind.
Any Sunday with Sigdi Lona Kima Talde Simjin Lengin Dictochin Tommy Dune Tor using Cham Tadung Tungal Tame Young Grupes Kishi Kichik Tamyam Makibe Lama Keno Tuji Nudusik Nijung Tingni Kivar Jingilo Shevadre.
The verse that expresses that supplication for the blessing of activating reorientation of mind in our mind stream is now in the chat in English, and it reads, "Alas, sentient beings such as I, wrongdoers with negative karma, wander continually throughout samsara since time without beginning. Even now, mired in the experience of endless suffering, disillusion does not surface, even for a moment. Master, know me, look on me swiftly with your great compassion. Bless me that renunciation arise from my inmost depths."
Oh, Dilada 이 선대 뭐마디 지강 탐한이들의 라마키노 투지 뉴드스 예중 등의 겨울 진길로 시베 지강이디 선대 뭐마들의
Nari.
드네 선대디 영역이 규디드네 직지 당보디 그래 지강 당보 시도 어디 가서 드네 당보 지강 당보 시디가 그랬던 거라서 나랑이 견 아니 랑당 다 신심지 탐제로 당가도 상화 이견 치시디 그러려나 교시 기지점에 맞게 봐서 그래 아니 교시 기지점에 맞게 봐디 오늘에 교시 기 거야 요래디 희내한다 나랑서 데라 견도 통마도 교시 기 맞도 봐디 견치버려 아니 교시 기 거야 얘기는 생각을 드라마 통매 뒤에 크로를 유린경 다둥 둥을 탐매 인용들베스 교시 기지점에 맞게베 제디 다 당분간도 크로알라 따나 아니 크로아디 통매 타요 말에 인자들이 맞아 통만미비 뒤에 다데바도 크로알라 라마메바 캠 둥을 기르에 둥을 켜버드지기 둥을 숨기 근처 매버를 나르래 디드베드니 둥을 딩은 속에 시에네 통tum나 아니 셈 교와 기억에 당아서 진짜 둘지시네요 소리 다 디가 그랬던 거라는 가서 당고 아니 코와라 통매 타요 말에 아니 마리바 마봉 봐도 탐에 타요 말에 코와라 탐에 타 매봐 말에 마리바 마봉나 탐에 타요 말에 탐에 타 매나더니 탐에 타 짠에 매나 가서 취제라고 봐면 타이로 랑신기 타요는 취제 거야요 말어 딘자더니 마리바 빵나 타요 말에 마방나 타요 말에 마공다 마리바 마방나 타요 말에 빵나 타요래 딜라지 가서 그러려는들 코와 타 위에서야 돼 매버서야 돼 나랑 라고라래 딘디드니 그러려는 나랑기 취 줍나 마리 코레다 마리바 빵네 아니 코와 타 위에 차그래 코와리 돌도 그래 아니 나랑기 취 마두 코레다 등진빵 맞었나 되는 지시 마리바 마방 봐도 되는 코와라 타요 말에 어디 네슬 지생고라 이안 당보 크로와 통매 탐매바데 세나 되니 마리바 마방나 탐매 탐매바데 세그래 데레테네 세그래
When we look at this verse, the actual supplication is set forth in the last 2 lines of the verse. There are 6 lines in the verse, and the last 2, Master, know me or know us, look on us swiftly with your great compassion. Bless us that renunciation, reorientation of mind arise from our inmost depths. Those last 2 lines are the actual supplication. But the cause for actually experiencing, actually feeling that supplication is the first 4 lines. Of those first 4 lines, these are relating our greatest shortcoming. The greatest shortcoming or failing in ourselves and all other sentient beings is set forth in the third line that says, disillusion does not surface even for a moment. What does this mean? This means that we are not disillusioned, disenchanted, giving up on samsara. What's the purpose for that disillusion? That is stated in the first two lines. Sentient beings such as I, wrongdoers with negative karma, wander continually throughout samsara since time without beginning. And then the next one as well, even now mired in the experience of endless suffering. What this is referring to is that samsara has no beginning point. If you were to trace back samsara to find an origin point, there is none to be found. So not only that, what that is saying is that from time without beginning, in time beyond time, there is our situation of wandering helplessly, powerlessly throughout samsara, experiencing uninterruptedly the three kinds of suffering. Obvious suffering, shifting suffering, and pervasive suffering have tormented us since time without beginning in samsara. When we understand this, when we understand the suffering character of samsara, then disillusion arises. This is the value of, this is laid out in the first two lines. And the reason that is important is what it is pointing out is that just as samsara has no origin point, no beginning point, as long as we do not eradicate the ignorance that is the root source of samsara, samsara also has no end. If samsara had an end point, then there'd be no point in engaging in the Dharma. If it just came to an end naturally without our input, then there'd be no purpose to engaging in the Dharma. It would be the case that even without eradicating ignorance, there would be an end to samsara. But that's not the case. The way it works is that samsara continues without end until ignorance is eradicated. Once ignorance is eradicated, that end of samsara happens. So whether samsara has an endpoint or not is entirely in our hands. It depends on our practice of Dharma. Our practice of Dharma is what enables us to eradicate the ignorance that is the root source of samsara. And having done so, we are liberated from samsara. So what this is saying is that it all depends on this. Whether or not ignorance is eradicated is the determining factor as to whether or not there is an end to samsara. It is vital to understand this situation, and the way we understand it is with reference to the beginningless character of samsara. Based on that, we're able to understand that samsara is similarly endless until ignorance is eradicated.
Hola. Dini kroala tongme tamebadi isekela any tendil chunigi kone samgore monejana.
Nare.
Tendil chuni de yang dini sudishana sumnala dugro. Dungal le nyamoba. Sumnala dugro.
Nare.
Dungal sayadi ngaso nilengi pungbodra. Lenyungi wangi keve nilengi pungbodi dungalra. Tene de gyu le legi gyu nyamongra. Tendil chuni di sumnala dugro sudina.
Nare.
Dine dade ngaranso nilengi pungbo. Dungaldi. Kabadujegi dungaldi. Nilengi pungbo yezamgi kabadujegi dungalra. Dine nilengi pungbo kabadujegi dungaldi. Any Kavani Jungare, Q Garela in Jungare, and Kawangame Lele in Jungara. Kawangame lady Swiss Sabarel, and Nadani, Marib, Numo Besavara. 녀몽바 나네 쪼디 그래서는 마릭바는 드샤니라 되게 싸바래 뒤랍디 그서더니 녀몽바디 가원에 깨래 그럴 때는 깨발랑 뒤가서다 니링이 품벌을 미그네 깨고라 그러나 대단한서 녀몽의 가원에 깨기도 미바 니링이 품벌 떠라 당고 nga sambe ngarjindi niring phumbol mi ki gwara din de ne ngai sorwa dewa ngai sorwa dungal de sorwa dewe gyu dungal gi ken disala mi ne de chadang ge do di labji de ne nyumong ki gi mi pa so de garare la na niring phumbol so ra da gebashena nelu longje 수디는 또디 너도 니링 본보더라 믹바시면은 용 계기 말아 어디 있는데 껴왕감에 레사행기 마릭바는 더샤 니디 믹바 거래를 믹네 껴와리라나 디 뒤수 니링 본보지여라 델 믹네드네 마릭바께 델 믹네 더샤게 드네 라사와 녀몽 senda게 디기 레사라 레디기 단대 풍부디 쪼라 디지디드니 디가수 마릭바당 도샤기 미버기르베 니링기 풍부디 가원에 깨려나 디나신드니 디 껴왕감에 레라드니 껴라 껴왕감에 레디 수사르나 양 마릭바당 도샤기 사와라 디 갑기 도샤다 마릭바디 가레를 미그니 껴war라나 디 뒤수 양 니링기 풍부지여라 가시 메나드니 마릭바당 도샤기 미고입니다 दी इंद कसु दिनी दिने तीन डोना दा दी कब की एनी निलिंग फुंबो दे गवन के दी मोमा की लेला दिने के बारे दिने ले दिसु सबरे मरि बदन दिने दशा के सबरे दी कसु दिने मरि बदन दशा करेले मिंगने के बारे दी कसु यहां दे दन दी न्यम्बे खुरंग मिबर गिरे दिने निलिंग फुंबो जी योरा दी रोती नि डोना निलिंग फुंबो दा न्यमोंग नि न्यम न्यम दो निलिंग फुंबो ले बेने न्यमोंग की लेसा लेगी निलिंग फुंबो छिमा दो dindichiri kasu, dini nga su niringi phungpo la mingni nyumongi lesa, dindichiri dini, dhruti kasu da nyumongi gawani kere, di mibor kiwe niringi phungpo la mingni kiwa re, dindichiri dini niringi phungpo dang le dang nyumongi ya kora kiamna, thome tha nyegi mara. Starting point nyegi mara.
When we look at this statement that samsara has no beginning to be found, actually the way to penetrate an understanding of that is through the 12 links of interdependent origination. Of those 12 links, briefly stated, it boils down to three critical things: kleshas, karma, and dukkha in Sanskrit, or in English, emotions that disturb mind's natural tranquility, which are kleshas, intentional action driven by those kleshas, which is karma, and the various kinds of suffering, discontent, and lack of fulfillment arising from those karmic actions, which is dukkha. Particularly the dukkha that we experience, the crux of the suffering of samsara are what are called these self-perpetuating skandhas, the body-mind complex that we associate with ourselves. How does that happen? On the strength of these skandhas, these five aggregates, the body-mind complex, we experience suffering. What is the cause of those self-perpetuating skandhas? The cause is karmic action. What is the cause of those karmic actions? It is the kleshas, the emotions that disturb mind's natural tranquility. So in brief, the crux of the dukkha, the suffering of samsara, is these self-perpetuating skandhas, this body-mind complex that continually perpetuates themselves. This is the core suffering, the pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, which is universal throughout samsara. The mere presence of the self-perpetuating skandhas is the indicator that we are experiencing the pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, universal suffering. Then where do those skandhas come from? What's the cause of those skandhas? It is the karmic actions of a previous life. Who accumulated those karmic actions? The kleshas of the previous life accumulated those karmic actions. And among those kleshas, the principal culprit is ignorance. Ignorance is the principal klesha that accumulates karmic actions. And then where do those kleshas come from? How do those kleshas arise? Kleshas arise by referencing the skandhas, the body-mind complex principally. That means that by referencing what we think of as I and clinging to it as I, believing it to be an I, these self-perpetuating skandhas serve as the scaffolding, the structure upon which kleshas reference and give rise to emotions that disturb mind's natural tranquility. In other words, we think, I want to feel happy. I do not want to suffer. The causes of my happiness, the causes of my suffering, the conditions for my happiness, the conditions for my suffering. All of these are referencing our own body-mind complex, the self-perpetuating skandhas. And this is what gives rise to the kleshas. Principally, it is ignorance of the character of these self-perpetuating skandhas that gives rise to the kleshas. And these are expressed in the various places, bodies, and enjoyments that we experience through the body-mind complex, the self-perpetuating skandhas. Simply put, if there was nothing to reference, no conceptual reference point, there'd be no kleshas that could arise. The kleshas arise because of the conceptual reference point of these self-perpetuating skandhas. Referencing those, referencing our own body-mind complex, attachment arises, aggression arises, and the full array of all the kleshas in their full display. Those kleshas motivate us to accumulate karmic actions. Those karmic actions yield various experiences of suffering. And again, the suffering, the crux of that suffering is a set of self-perpetuating skandhas, another set of body-mind complex. Where did they come from? They come from karmic actions accumulated in a previous life. Who accumulated them? Ignorance, attachment, aggression, the various kleshas accumulated that karmic action. Based on what? Based on referencing the self-perpetuating skandhas. So why is that? Why does it boil down to these 5 aggregates that perpetuate themselves? Because without them as a reference point, as a focus for the kleshas couldn't arise. It is based on them that the kleshas arise, motivate karmic action, and yield another set of suffering, another set of self-perpetuating skandhas. These serve as the reference point for a new set of kleshas, a new set of self-perpetuating skandhas. So we can see that the kleshas and the skandhas go hand in hand in this way. By referencing the self-perpetuating skandhas, kleshas arise. When kleshas arise, they motivate karmic action. When karmic action is accumulated, that yields suffering, in particular, the suffering of another set of self-perpetuating skandhas. And so we have this cycle of self-perpetuating skandhas, kleshas, karma, and dukkha, skandhas, klesha, karma, and dukkha, and so forth, in a cyclic process, which is called samsara, cyclic existence. If you were to try to find the beginning point to this, there is none to be found. There is no starting point to be found to this cycle.
All that did any tendil girimba lugdo samladana lugdo sanadani debuni ya samladana sedigi debu namindi kyawngame lele jung kyawngame lele marig nyumongsa nyumongdi any naming pumala mi yene tne ya debuni ya dorne samladana tne thongme tha nyigi mare so that's so point digarela nadine ngaranso kyawa 당부 개와 렌즈 거스들이 심 세리지여라 심 세리디 거는 중에 밤에 구달래 중에 개왕감이 아니 코랑다 릭다웨 주 개왕감이 되니 아니 셈레드니 중에 소디라 심 세리디 먼저 개와 당부 개와 렌즈 거스 심 깨지 당부지여라 깨지 당부디 코랑다웨 심 깨지 나말라 되니 중에 되니 양나 아니 밤에 구달래 되니 중에 so point dera tele tene yang lele tene juma im badan kyawanga me marik badan de tendel de sini tup thugura o din de ne ngazo tendel gi ta gyunde gi diji gi chini de gadar na dini debu kare ne rang na rig dawe gyule tene jungure songra di tendel gi chini ra da tendel gi chini di 교 매발에 연구 말에 미팅 비교를 깨기 말했어. 당한서 셈 깨지 당부 세디기 셈 깨지 당부디 아니 코랑다 팀 비교를 주나? 되는 코랑다 팀 비교디 셈 깨지 코랑게 셈 깨지가 마셔라. 디 껴가 말아다. 가시들이 세디기 셈 깨지 당부디 코랑다 릭다에 아니 교를 주마 많이 봐 미팅 비교를 주나? 밤에 구달라서 올라 주나? 되니 껴가 마 요거에 믿어. 어디다더니 간수 세디기 셈 깨지 당부디 아니 교가르레스 나도거든요. 교 매발에 용식이 말아. 교 매발에 중 켈레네 교 망보여라. 야나 남바군도 중미세 받아 야나드니 교 매발에 중나 양나 때네 중미세 받아 양나드니 뒤에 남바군도 중앙 타기로 어디인데니 교 매발에 중앙 말에 아니 무슨 비길에 중앙양 중나드니 텐데기 친이나 나가라 무슨 비길에 중나드니 교 이민 강을 상말에드니 대부 강 이민 상화 영적으로 어디인데 무슨 비길에 중앙양 무슨 버려 교 매발에 중앙양 무슨 버려 디인지 아니 tumbi gyule chungo ura. Tumbi gyule chungna dini sim keji dambu di yu sim sirik sha ura. Di shana dini kurangi keji ngama yang sim se digi keji dambu sim digi dini gyu ngama di sim sirik sha na di kyawa ngama sim tu ura. O tende zini yadro na dini sim ki keji dambu nyingi mara. 지나시 겨왕감에 심 겨왕감을 두는 겨왕감에 심 계지 담보도 양들은 디감에 심을 때는 주나 되는 심기 통에 탄 얘기 말해 같이 심기 통에 탄 얘나들 심 통마디 주매를 중앙염 야는 믿음이 길을 중앙 샤거라 어디 코알라 통마미 견제인데 심로 통마미 견제래 신스리기니 균을 통마 타요 말해서 가시 통해서 연하더니 된대게 쌤 토마디 아니 미팅 베기래 중앙당 양나 규매래 중앙 타기래 해서 켈렌고 그래 켈렌더니 켈렌토야 여마래 두바다 나와래
when we look at the 12 links of interdependent origination in this way, we're looking at it in what's called the reverse progression, which means that we are starting with the result and tracing it back to the causes. This is this process that we've been going through just now, beginning with suffering, particularly in the form of the self-perpetuating skandhas, and tracing it back to the various causes, the cause of suffering being karmic action, the cause of karmic action being the kleshas, and the cause of the kleshas being its conceptual reference point, the self-perpetuating skandhas. When we trace things back in this reverse progression that goes to the that traces back the causes of the particular results, then we are finding that there is this continual cycle of the skandhas, kleshas, karma, and dukkha that has no beginning. Similarly, we can look at it from the perspective of mind's substantial characteristics. So how do we do that? When we have taken birth, that first moment of mind, when life begins, where does it come from? Where does the result of the first moment of mind in a given life come from? What's the cause? Either the cause is one that is similar in kind to that first moment of mind, or it is something else. So when we trace that back and we try to find what is that cause of the first moment of mind in a given life, if it is similar in kind, if it's a cause that it corresponds to the first moment of mind, then it must be a previous moment of mind because it is similar in kind. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that mind came about through the various physical components of the parents of the being holding that mind. So we can use the same process of interdependence to try to trace back and establish what are the causes of mind. To do this, we have to be really clear about the natural property of composite things. Things that are composite, that are conditioned, have the natural property of arising from causes that are similar in kind to themselves. You will not find any composite thing that arises from a cause different than itself, nor will you find any composite thing that arises without a cause at all. Mind follows that same natural property. So when we try to find what the cause of that first moment of mind is, it is the previous moment of mind, similar in kind. This is what is labeled the previous life. If it were the case that mind could arise from a cause different than itself, such as the physical components of the bodies of the parents, then there wouldn't be a previous life. But is that possible? Can that be the cause? If it were the cause, what would be the failings? So let's look again at that natural property of composites, of conditioned things. There are many, many flaws to the possibility that conditioned things arise without a cause. What are those failings? Either things would be popping up everywhere without a cause from any old thing, or they wouldn't arise at all. It would be totally random. That is contradicted by our experience. We don't experience composite things, conditioned things arising without any cause at all. Then how about arising from a cause, but not necessarily the same in kind to the result? This would be the situation where the result arises from a cause that does not correspond to it. that means that that too is flawed. That means that anything could be the cause for any result because there wouldn't be any correspondence between cause and result. That doesn't make any sense either. It contradicts our experience. What this shows us is that it's impossible for results to arise either without a cause or from a cause that doesn't correspond in kind to the result itself. Simply put, everything arises from a cause that corresponds with itself. When we look at the substantial character of mind, the first moment of mind in one life must be the result arising from a cause that corresponds to itself, a cause similar in kind. This previous moment must be from a previous life because it precedes the first moment of the present life. Here too, when we trace back the causes of mind, the first moment in this life as a result, there is none to be found except for the moment of the ending the previous life. We can continue to trace that back to the first moment of that life, and that must have been the result of the cause from the last moment of that previous life, and so forth. Keep going, knock yourself out, go as far back as you'd like. There is no first moment of mind to be found. Why is that? If you could pinpoint a first moment of mind, it would have had to arise either without a cause or from a cause that is different in kind, that doesn't correspond to itself. This is neither logical nor does it correspond to our experience. This is why we can determine that mind is beginningless in character. It is a continuum that is impossible to find a beginning point. And when we speak of taking a rebirth, the first moment of this mind, it is something that must arise from a cause that is similar in kind to itself, that corresponds to itself. Anything else is neither logical nor does it is illogical and contradicts our experience.
Wala, that did over the name of Korwala, Tongmi Tamebala, Hisikina. The Korwala Tongmi Tameba Hisikia did ni Hajangi Gachore. The Korwala Tongmi Tamebe Hisikina didn't run so. Any Dungal Yang. Korwala Tongme Tameva Isikiana didn't kill a Tangmeva in Bala Isikigre. Kill a Tangmeva in Bala Isikiana. Tini or Tanda Bardu Dungal Giri Dungal Chapa Digi Dungal Yang Tameva. New Sulayang Hisikigre. Tell a tene similar Joakigre. Joa Garkigre Lama Crowe Punsola Hidemeba. When a Kiwa Dangmeba Dinalang and Fly on Gajingi Kiwa Yang Dangmeba Lang. Colleague Kevi Kiwa and Dangmeba Lang. Deep comes to the knee, lie on Gajingi Benjo Longchip Pinsu Sobala, Landang Mambo Longchip Sare. In Yang, Tadi Negabla, Tempe used the young Yamaridi. Did was something, didn't I see colleague Kevi Kiwa Yang Dangmeba Lang. Landang Mambo Lang. The colleague gave Gessi any Benjo Longchip Pinsu Sobala Yang, Landang Mambo Longchip. In a Teddy Negapsu, Tini Diso, Tempe Yuldu Yamare. Tell us Samna, Tene kurwe punso gang la ya nyingbo meba. Hiden meba. Mida jing midemba, hiden meba la ije kegire. Tezam mare. Tene tanda bardu, dang mebe, kurwa thongma mebe di nangla, dang mebe kewa di nangla, nyawa la kewa yang dang meba chung yore. La soba, ngen songi neso yang kewa dang me lang yore. Nyawa hida dundo la soba. Samlo dangdi dini, ngen song la soba, nyawa hida dundo la soba la, kewa garjini lang re salam, migewa sawa lang re, migewa garjini sa re sta na, dini nga to khuli kiwe kewa lindu kazu, khuli kiwe kewe, longju punsun soba la sim cha, diso la dini, serna dang sincha ki wangi hida la kaya dang, khuli kiwe kewa lindu kazu, khuli kiwe kewa inare, chidang kewa inare, di kazu dini kesi la cha, shengi kesi to, maa kya mi se, dela dini dini punsun soba di, hide meba tanda ma se, dela dini nyumungi le sani, ngensong sundu kewa chung yore. Dila di ngensong sundu kewa di, 사다 미 분소 될 때는 중요해요. 이 제대 가서 사다 미 분소의 미다지 믿음 받은 맛에 루에 최진래. 먼저 될 분소 소발에서는 이제 게래 될 때는 도자게 시단게 될 때는 도자 시단 등목이 내서 년송숨 아니 냐와 히다 dundola 껴라. 어제든 먼저 냐와 히다 dundola 당매바 껴 랭거디 아니 사다 미 분소를 때는 중요해요. 이 인지들이 분소의 미다지 믿음 받은 맛에 루에 최진래. 디임발라이 시게도 그래. 어디인지 그룹에 분석라 교학기 그래.
It's vitally important to develop great confidence, a conviction in the beginningless character of samsara as just described. I cannot overstate the importance of having the conviction. The belief or faith is another way of translating this Tibetan term in the beginningless character of samsara. Why is that so important? Because by having conviction in the beginningless character of samsara, we have a similarly stable conviction that we have taken infinite numbers of lives in samsara. So infinite numbers of lives, what does that mean? That means that from time without beginning in samsara until now, we have been tormented without cease by the three kinds of suffering: the suffering of suffering, which is obvious pain; the suffering of change, which is pleasure; the pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, which is the neutral experience of powerlessness. Having confidence that we have been tormented in any of these numbers of ways of samsara is what allows us to give rise to disillusion, disenchantment, basically this sense of I've had it with samsara. What does that mean, to give rise to disillusion or disenchantment with samsara? It means seeing that even all of the abundant goodness that we might identify in samsara is unreliable. It's not something that is ultimately fulfilling in the least. If we have the confidence that we have taken countless rebirths in samsara, we similarly have the confidence that we have taken countless rebirths, even at the level of gods such as Indra or Brahman, even at the level of a universal monarch, which is the highest riches of the desire realm of samsara. So even these states, the highest possible in samsara, with great enjoyments, great resources, a wonderful physical form, and so forth. We've attained these births countless times. How much of that wealth do you have now? How much do you still count that wealth, that power, that ability now? You've taken birth in these forms countless times, infinite times. That's what it means to have taken infinite births in samsara. But what is left of that now? You don't have none of that is something that was stable at all. However much there was present at those times, none of it remains. This is what allows us to develop confidence in the unreliability of even the greatest good possible in samsara. But it doesn't stop there. Countless lives in samsara means that we have experienced countless lives as hell beings, as hungry ghosts, as animals. Why is that? Why have we taken rebirths in these three negative realms? It is due to engaging in non-virtuous action, non-virtuous karmic action, that we take rebirth in negative realms. When did those non-virtuous karmic actions occur and why? In lives such as a universal monarch and other high points of samsara with great power, great wealth, great charisma, great physical attainments. Based on these great experiences at the high points of samsara, we develop attachment, aggression, and so forth, the full array of kleshas. Those kleshas are what engage in the non-virtuous actions that give rise to the negative realm rebirths. Attachment giving rise to a hungry ghost rebirth, aggression giving rise to hell realm rebirth, apathy giving rise to animal realm rebirths, and so forth. So what happens is, for example, with the great resources, power, and might of a high point of samsara, what we do is we develop attachment to our power, our dominion, our country. We wage war on others. We kill beings. And these non-virtuous actions yield a rebirth in the hell realms or any of the other negative realms. It is due to the very kleshas that motivate us in the high point lives of samsara, such as universal monarch or deva realms, that we accumulate the karmic actions that lead to negative realm rebirths. The abundant goodness that we can find among the human and deva realms of samsara are what causes negative realm rebirths. They are part and parcel of the experiences, the very bodies that we hold in these human and deva realms. These are what give rise to the attachment, aversion, and apathy that lead to rebirth in any of the three negative realms. The very abundant goodness of the human and deva realms of samsara that are part and parcel of those experiences are what causes the negative realm rebirths. This is what gives us this sense of disillusionment, disenchantment with even the goodness of samsara. We give up.
Voilà. Tiene ngazo jidwada khawala thome thameba hicheke tela tene kyawala dhangmebe hicheke o dijena tene ngazo mi sine da ngazo kineshi khawala kyawala sa de kineshi yore dinane phalchawa ngalgere Dini dini ngal gi nesu kyo lene ngazo ngal kila kyo lena ama yoro dini ngal gi mangcho ama leke ame homa thungro chungjung gosu dini ngazo thongma mebane danda badu ngal gi su kyo lene ame homa khase thung yore ngazo tigamna Kumbulu yu sungare sitting nala rere gyasu shile langbayi oma tungde azo kyo thomela samlodang eni khorwa thomela samlodang kyo dangmela samlodang na eni nganso ngalgi nesu kyo kene shigi nangne ngalgi nesu kyo len bayan dangmera ngalgi nesu kyo lene ame oma tungbadi cho shila ngaso sa shaye na gyasu shile lagre sungre gyasu shile da dingsang Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean. This is like a lesson. Doesn't carry a ocean. Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean. Doesn't ocean correct?
Lari, that's a mampere.
No, this
Arctic Ocean.
is how much like this.
Lari.
Isn't the Gumulugi, Gasu Shilly, Lagre Songra? Gasu Shitam Yuri Songa. The Lama Sosona, Gasu Shilly, Lagre Songa de la Point Yores, Dennis. Gasu Shitam Yuri Sona, then Kevala Taiba Talgres. Kevala Danguba Talgres. Kevala Dangu, Kovala Tomaya Talgres. Or the Gasu Shilly Ha, Songa. Say Yamara. Gasu Shizam Suna say Yara. Didn't Gasu Shizam Sun say Yana didn't Kevala Dangiba Tiger, Kevala Dangiano, Kovala Tomaiba Tigers. Didn't Gasu Shidel, Hagres on Adela, point your resume. Require resume. Require Garesana, Kova Tommy and Keva Dami in Badre. Gasu Shizam Suna. Any Kevala Dangiba and Kovala Tomaiba Tigers.
When we have this confidence of samsara being beginningless in character, and as a result, we also have the confidence of having taken countless rebirths in samsara, what happens? We recognize that of the various ways that we might exist as a human, principally, there are different ways that we are describing rebirths, different sources of rebirth. But for humans, principally, this is a rebirth from the womb. So when we speak of rebirth from a womb, that means that we are taking rebirth from a mother. A mother is what actually yields rebirth from a womb. And so what this is saying is that we have taken an infinite number of rebirths as a human from a mother's womb. So how does this help us understand this situation of constant rebirths in samsara? This is a situation that the Master Nagarjuna lays out in his text, A Letter to a Friend, where he says, if we were to take all of the mother's milk that we have consumed in our career in samsara, in time without beginning, across infinite lives, simply those existences where we were born as a human from the womb of a mother would be sufficient to fill what was then called the 4 oceans. At the time, all of the oceans of the world were described as being 4 oceans. Maybe it's the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian and some other one. But basically, it's a poetic way to reference all of the water bodies, all of the oceans of the world. And what Nagarjuna is pointing out here is he's trying to make infinite numbers something that our mind can comprehend. He's pointing out what infinite means in a way that is comprehensible to mind. To say that mind has no beginning, that we've taken infinite rebirths, is something that's difficult for mind to wrap itself around. So this analogy is a way to comprehend what that means. However much water, however much volume the oceans of the world hold, it's quite large, but it's finite. What this saying is pointing out is that the mother's milk we have consumed is greater than all of the oceans of the world. In other words, it is infinite. He is using a poetic reference to present a reasoning that allows us to comprehend what it means to say that samsara has no beginning point, that we have taken infinite rebirths in samsara.
Hola. Dito yang jagar gi lobin chi gi sore. Tini ngarang so dundu kyawa lene pena kidang phakpa la kyawa lenbe danga yang mangbore. Dindi tini ngaso kidang phakpe kyawa lene mitang wa sayaro. Kidang phakpe kyawa lene mitang wa sawadi ngaso chochi la sayo na sore. Tini chochi la sayo na ri gebul tini lumbo gi tse legen togore sore. Kasana kyawa dangmero.
Lare.
Dindi lobin digi yan dini kumbuludu dan shigwa sore. Ri gebu tsar kungya mare. Ri gebu le thagre sore. Ri gebu lumbo legen togore sore. Songdi gasu tini ngazu kasi ri gebu tsam lamna ngazu kidam phagwe kyawa lemba dila dhangyo ba thagiro. Dini dini kyawa la dhangyo ba thagiro, kawa la thongmayo ba thagiro. Dini kawa la thongma medi kyawa la dhangyo ba yinzang ini kidam phagwe kyawa lene mitangwa sawa diyang tse yo maro. Dini gasu tini kasi sasha yana ri gebu lumbo le thagre sore. Dini dini ngazu kidam phagwe kyawa lene mitangwa yang deza mangu sayo re. Ngalgi nesu kyawa lene ama homa yang deza mangu thongyo re. Digi tsul disla samradana dini semla krowa la kyawa kegire sore.
There's a great pundit, a great master of India that uses another example to help us engage this infinite quantity of lies in samsara. And that example is, let's just focus on the quantity of lives in which we were experiencing the life of a dog or a pig. As a dog or a pig in countless lives, we went about eating lots of filth. Let's gather together all of the filth we consumed as a dog or a pig in the countless lives we experienced those rebirths and put them on one place. The scholar here is saying that if you did so, the amount, the substance of all that filth would be greater than the highest mountain. The form of all of that filth would dwarf the highest possible mountain, the king of mountains. Again, this is a way of trying to understand how it is that we can comprehend the significance of countless lives in samsara. Even the countless lives we've experienced as a dog or a pig in samsara in time without beginning, countless lives in these forms, just those alone, the amount of filth we ate in those lives is much greater than the highest of mountains. It would dwarf those mountains, similar to the mother's milk we have consumed when we have taken rebirth from a womb. It is greater still than all the water in the oceans of the world. Thinking of this way, it is so tiring. We become disillusioned, disenchanted with samsara.
Hola. Teni kyoa kigire, teni semla dua yang legi doa. Dua kare legi doa, tadum kaze thum kare, oma. Di dua legi doa, di dua gechambara. Teni tadum kidam phambala kyoa lene mizama kaze sago kare. Ame homa kaze thum kare, tadum. Di dua legi doa, di dua gechambara. Ni da di lendi kumbuludu ki son yore sitting nala. Tadum susu kyo yi jesu tangwe kora pe. 델레 치망 니지 뚱살로 단다바도 퉁사와 델레 마 통화 시기래 소래다 통에 켜봐요 말해 통화 시기래 일러비가서 choice is yours choice is 소설라고 할래요 일러비 choice 그래요라는 디 컴퓨터로 송도 왔어봐 소수교의 지수장을 걸어봐서 소수교의 지수장나 근데 대동들의 망서 통과지 그래서 학부의 지수장나 학부의 기부
Nasa?
이속이 지수장나 되네 직전을 이 타마인 그래 그런 게 라이프 타마인 그래 직전에 대동 라이프 카시를 통과지 그래 되네 타열 그런 수직도지를 상계 두는 디 라스트라 파이널라
네.
레지를 상계 맞좀 나더니 대동 개와 카시지 통과지 그래 근데 개와 카시기 제수 맞아 애니 크로판도 그래 디디디니 소설라 라레게 됐습니다. 소설교 제수 당기 파고 제수 당기 소설교 제수 당나 소설교 제수 당 그러베 다동 델레 세망니지 뚱살로
Out of this weariness, an important question comes to mind. How much more mother's milk do I have to drink? How much more filth do I have to eat in a life as a dog or a pig? This is a very important question. It's very important because it relates to our future career in samsara. It's a situation where Nagarjuna also relates for sentient beings, ordinary beings who choose to follow the course of samsara. There is even a greater amount than that to be drunk. In other words, there's even more mother's milk to be drunk in the future than the infinite amount we've had in the past, greater even than the oceans of the world. Simply put, this is important because it is pointing out that the choice is in our hands. If we decide to follow the course of samsara, there's no end to the number of lives ahead of us, the amount of mother's milk we will drink in births from a womb, the amount of filth we would eat as in births as a dog or a pig. However, if we choose to follow a course of realization, the path of the Aryas, the realized beings, then there is an end in sight. There is light at the end of the tunnel, because this is the course that eradicates samsara. So the choice is up to us. It's in our hands. Each and every one of us has the choice of following a continually infinite career in samsara, or choosing to follow after the steps of the Aryas, the realized beings, and based on that, to be able to eradicate samsara and bring this endless weariness to an end.
Hola. 인디들이 가서 수수교 제수 장나 다동양 겨와라 치매 탐에 타야 요 말아.
Hare.
어디인디들이 탐에 봐 크로와라 캠베 술들 이 새끼나 디양 가서 땡들디 룩중도 상로다나 탐에 봐라 이 새끼 그래. 그러나 룩중도 상로다나서나 땡당 가서 봉보들 명내 머리 바뀌기도 와. 도착기기도 와. 어디인디들이 서로와 대동니라 차단 계기도 서로에 낀 롱저의 명내 차단 계기도 서로와 눈을기 낀라 명내 아니 세단 계기도 서로와 대화기 낀라 명내 차와 계기도 어디인지 디기 레사기도 근데 레디기 껴져면 되니 니랑 풍부 두고라 근데 껴져면 니랑 풍부들 명내 녀몽 랑싱이 끼기라 그렇으나 무슨 녀몽 딜라 롭종 제고면도 검 겨고면도 스터디 제고면도 그래라는 녀몽디 검신 베돌 깨르말라 미데 바성라 무슨 녀몽디 검사라 될 베돌 제고면도 어디 이제더니 껴져면 니랑 풍부들 미디 가서 될라더니 머리밖에 랑싱이 끼기래 장고 말에 검고 말에 되네 될 명내 착바 랑싱이 끼기래 나기갈 랑싱이 끼기래 디나시 트로발라 차당 랑싱이 끼기래 디 트로에 낀라 차당 랑싱이 끼기래 딘디 베돌 깨르말라 미데 바 연결 베돌 제고면도 드니 녀몽 되게 레사도도 레 되게 껴와 렌도그로 어디로 지도 가서 드니 규탕 객미도 객거리 담비 쉬기 년내라 담비 쉬기 년내는 지금 알아 어디인데 가서 담비 치 드니 녀몽 뒤 랑싱기 끼기도 레 랑싱기 사도도 베돌 메와 디디드니 땡땡보로 땡땡보서는 세리기 땡디 그래서는 센세리 들어 센세리 들어 타야 말아 땡땡보래 되는 녀몽들라 검고면도 배설 제고면도 랑슈기 깨기도 규도상 되는 데라 님보여 말아 어디 규도상 계획매 되는 대부 도야 말아 디지털 것도 되는 제 디기 풍벌을 명는 마리바게 녀몽 도샤게 디기 레사 양겨 제면 니네 풍벌도 델 명네 양 랑싱기 되네 배들 제목고 녀몽 깨기래 도샤 깨기래 디기 레사 그래 연결 껴 제면 니네 풍벌도 그래 디디 되네 텐딜디 콜로코로기도 디디드니 녀몽당 레당 치미네밍이 풍부 딜레 녀몽 레 나밍이 풍부 되니 콜로 타메 바 그러기도 디 텐디 루중도 삼로 당나라
Lari. And this is so vitally important because it's a way of tracing the links of interdependent origination in a forward progression, what's happening ahead of us. So it's up to each and every one of us what course we choose to follow. If we have this confidence that we have been wandering throughout samsara, time, birth after birth, without beginning, and then we can develop an understanding of the links of interdependent origination in the forward direction as well, to see if there is an end in sight to this cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death. So let's look at that forward progression of interdependent origination. It starts out with these self-perpetuating skandhas, what we think of as me, I, mine. Conceiving of this self-perpetuating skandhas, having them be our reference point for our experience is what gives rise to kleshas, for example, desirous attachment. Then everything that we experience, every thing that we encounter gives rise to a feeling of either pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality. These are the platforms from which attachment, aversion, and apathy arise. So based on these feelings as the conditions, all of the particular enjoyments that we experience with our skandhas are the reference point from which attachment, aversion, and apathy arise. Positive experiences or experiences we think of as positive yield attachment, those we think of as negative yield aversion, and so forth. These kleshas, the attachment, the aversion, and so forth, are what accumulate karmic actions. Those karmic actions would yield a future set of self-perpetuating skandhas, the 5 aggregates or body-mind complex we will think of as me. What's more, this process is self-perpetuating. It happens automatically by itself. Once that new set of skandhas has arisen, the kleshas immediately reference them. They immediately arise. There's no need to study. There's no need to meditate. There's no need for instructions. There's no need to practice. They just happen. On the strength of prior habituation, we reference the self-perpetuating skandhas. Kleshas naturally arise. Those kleshas lead to karmic action. Those karmic action lead to future suffering in the form of yet another set of self-perpetuating skandhas. So in a future life, the mere presence of those self-perpetuating skandhas serves as the reference point for kleshas, attachment, aversion, apathy, effortlessly. They arise without any effort, without our trying to or our asking for it to happen. Kleshas naturally arise. They lead to accumulating karmic action. Those karmic actions lead to suffering in the form of yet another set of self-perpetuating skandhas. This is a case when we're not actually engaging in the practice of Dharma, taking it into experience. This effortless process perpetuates itself. The kleshas arise, karmic actions are accumulated, and suffering in the form of another set of self-perpetuating skandhas occurs. Why is that? Because the basis is stable. What is this basis? It's substantial quality of mind. It is stable. We can trace it back as we did before, and there is no beginning point. That stability is what gives a foundation for the cycle of klesha, karma, and skandhas as suffering to occur without effort, without practice, without meditation, without study. As long as all those causes are present and there is nothing to impede them, the result will necessarily arise. This is the nature of things. This is why when we have the skandhas as a basis, without anything to impede it, the kleshas will naturally arise without effort, leading to accumulating karmic action, leading to the suffering in the form of yet another set of skandhas that self-perpetuate. This is the interdependent origination process in a forward direction. The wheel keeps turning. Kleshas, karma, and a later set of suffering in the form of self-perpetuating skandhas, which again lead to kleshas, karma, and another form of self-perpetuating skandhas, indefinitely without end. This is the contemplation of interdependent origination in the forward progression.
All of ဒီရင်ဒီဒီတော့ခရောထမဲလာဒီချက်ကနာဒီနေ့ဂျူတာကေကလေးခရောထမဲညမုံမဘန်းနခရောထမဲပါဒီတင်တဲ့ကိစနီရာဒီရှေ့ပါဒီရှရဘရောရှရဘဒဲလတဲ့နေတယ် Juda gine garin bale juda gine thongro tel tene juda ki giro di ke na dine garcha gre khorwa tha yoba khorwa le dole gi thabje khorwa le dole gi deba ki giro 전적이 삼박기 그래. 근데 돌투그래 말했다나 돌투그래 그래라나 뉴몽디 심기 연제 말해 심기 랑시 말해 심기 춘낭래 디인디 방도롱아래 셈당 더롱래 정글로 타야 성으로 교연 거래 인바디 심기 춘낭래 연제 거래 인바디 심기 랑시래 어디 인디 가서 뉴몽바디 셈라 여래 이네 심기 랑시 말해 심기 춘낭래 심기 춘낭세데 가서 드니 긴 루브르기 긴라 때니 중앙에 마도 셈라 랑싱기 여바데 말아 셈라 랑싱기 연나 셈다 덜미로 말아 어디인데 녀몽바디 네급기 긴라 때니 셈라 중앙에 디인다더니 만지 셈디 곰시기 제수 저거라 어디인데 녀몽바디 통면에 곰시 첨부 여당 되니 님보 맞대나 랑싱기 매바 차기 말해 곰신 베드로 결만을 맞대봐라 되니 심세릭라니 경기 타야 말아 땐 녀몽기 땐 심세릭들라 경기 타야 말아 땐 땜바 땐지 땐 땜바 곰신 베드로 결만을 맞대봐 인상 아니 랑싱기 열도야 말아 님보 맞대봐라 님보 땐나 빵도롱아래 가르지네 않나 심기 랑시 말해 심기 주낭래 디니 셈라 예술디 루브르베 술디 요레마도 루브르와 데룽기 술디 요레마도 심기 랑신도 두바 말해 디니 가서 녀몽베 니믹통 크로아타메바임베 니믹통 단적에 녀몽바 심기 주낭이베시 다룽드시 아니 달도에 데룽 달루가바셰 달도룽아셰네드니 달바지기 삼베 삼로 막여바 미세바라 어디에다 녀몽발레 달바지기 인세기 삼로 도도 메바 깨야라 달루고베 고바통 달도룽이 김센통 디니디 신고에 계시므로 달고바통에 달도룽 무룽마셰나 양 태섬으로 달투그레 말에 다야기 더바 전에 달투그레 말에디 question mark 근데 달 괴바디 마시는 달도 롱미롱을 제바에 쉬고 말아 어디 한번 달 괴바디 쉬고라 달 괴바디 쉬고야 가서는 님모 만달나 프로와 타메래도 디 시기도 님모 달 괴래도 이제 달 투그레 말에디 question mark 달 투그레 말에다는 데 심기릉신 님모 뭐지 심기릉신에 말디로 심기릉신기 쳐래 루브르기 깽기 왕기 중에 쳐래 그래 어디인다 내가 따지 드니 루브르도 깽기 왕기 중에 루브르에 쳐 심기 투낭을 해봐도 이 심기릉신기 연대 말에 심기견
말해
심기견래 견디랑시 인식이 말아
말해
이시나 되니 달 루아이 버시기래
Ready? When we have this confidence, as just explained, in the character of samsara as endless unless something changes, that confidence breeds a kind of fear. This is a fearsome situation. And so when we really consider it, fear arises. The sense that samsara will continue unabated until kleshas are eradicated altogether is the natural property of interdependence. When we think of it this way, that understanding is prajna, precise knowledge. It's the precise knowledge that sees a fearsome situation as something to be feared. Precise knowledge is precisely engendering fear because the situation is one worthy of being feared. So what's happening here is that there is an understanding that we want to be free of samsara, that this situation is untenable and we want to be free from it. Then that breeds an understanding that we must be free from it, that it is vital for us to be free of samsara. Then what ends up happening is that leads us to the question, is it even possible? Is this wish to be free from samsara, this vital need, something that can be done or not? As it happens, it is, because this state that prajna recognizes, the endless character of samsara until kleshas are eradicated from their root, is not a natural property of mind. It is a deluded perception and is not intrinsic to mind. Because it is not intrinsic, because it is misperception, it is something that is susceptible of eradication. This too is something that Jungin Kondrul Lodro identifies. He says that the failings of mind are misperception, deluded appearances, whereas all of the excellent qualities of mind are intrinsic. This is the situation that we work with to determine for ourselves that it is possible to eradicate the kleshas. They are not intrinsic to mind. They are deluded appearances that arise based on adventitious or superficial conditions. Conditions that are temporary and superficial give rise to the kleshas. The kleshas are not intrinsic to mind, and as a result, they can be removed. They are removable. This is the situation that we encounter, that the kleshas arise based on circumstantial conditions. It is not something intrinsic to mind. So this means that whether or not we're able to eradicate the kleshas depends on whether or not we apply a remedy to them. If we apply a remedy, they can be removed because they are removable in character. And if we do not, they will continue in this endless career of samsara. Why is that the case? Again, it's because the substantial character, the substance of mind is a stable foundation for the kleshas. Even though the kleshas are not intrinsic to mind, mind provides a stable foundation for their continual habituation to arise without effort, without relying on anything. They arise out of habituation naturally. This is the case when we do not rely on a remedy. The process continues without end. As soon as we rely on a remedy, because the kleshas are susceptible of being removed, we can eradicate them. They are not intrinsic to mind. They are deluded appearances arising based on adventitious or superficial conditions, which is what allows us to actually remove the kleshas, eradicate them. They are not inherently present to mind. Seeing the deficiencies of the kleshas then is vitally important. When we have the disenchantment, the disillusionment, the weariness with this endless future career in samsara that the kleshas represent, we have this longing to be free of samsara. We see the purpose, the necessity for being free of samsara. And then we ask the question, is it possible? Knowing that it is possible, knowing that it is necessary, wanting to be free of it, it's impossible that the mindset that resolves, I shall be free of it, will not arise. This is what happens when we have the wish to be free of samsara, we see the necessity of it, and we ask the question, is it possible or not? There is still that doubt, even when we see the necessity of being free of the kleshas to end our career in samsara. there is a doubt as to whether or not that's something that can be done. We know that samsara will continue as long as the kleshas are not eradicated. Then the natural question is, can they be eradicated or not? This is why the fact that they are not intrinsic to mind is important. The character of the kleshas is one that is superficial, adventitious, a diluted appearance of mind, a flaw that is not inherent to mind. And this is what makes them removable. This is what allows us to understand that we are able to be free of the kleshas and thus put an end to samsara.
All or the ending of the Nyomomba the Lubru and be Gimse the Carrera Lana drink also Nyomomba the Tamji Zawa the Dangzi Maribara. Then it Dangzi Maribadi Simgi similar Lubru to the Yebe Gimse Carrera Lana Dangzi Maribadi you'll Chijilo the Shubara. Dangzi Maribadi in Yeling Pumbo and Ming any Chijilo the Shubara. Or the Yula Chijilo the Shuba in them, Yulgi Nesula Narang Singituba Menayang, Tangzingis, Yeling Pumbo and Ming Narang Singituba Zingora. Truly. Or the Yulgi Nesula Chijilo the Shubadi, in the Gimzingi, Yulgi Nesul Chishin the Tona, Chijilo is in the Yaldogra. Or the name that is Yulgi Nesul the Chijilo the Zimbadi, Simgirang Simara. Simgirang Sinang of the Sim Session Rivara. Session reverse the Yula Gande by the Zinsona. In Yulgi Nesul the Pen Dijetum Midaba in body, Gray Yamara. Dijetum Tamtam Tawachaya Yamara. The Ganesh Koa Dungal in Badian, Koa Dumna Dungal to Durimado, Koa Deva Ingeji Yamara. The Indian Koa Dungal to Tobadi, Naming Gurmisivara. Katan Koa Dungal to Tobadi, Simgit Rangshira. Sim Kulta Bakurang Rangshira. Did you meet up Tobadi? Sherabra. Sherab the Simgirang Shira. Tell me wrong. Karjine, Diji the Thum Tawachaya Yamara. Tanasi and the Yulgin Nangsulgi any Rangshin Kare, but the Jita was in the Tobadi. Then Simgi and then the same that tell me wrong. The Chijilo the Shubadi Garatana, King Wangi, Chijilo the Shugora. Pedro Chasana. Pedro Chana. Telling us Yula Tabar Zimbadi. Yula Tabar Zimbadi, Garelana, Simgirang Simaradi. In a Simgirang Simaradi, King Wangi Jumaradi. Fulgora. King Garelana, Nangla Sosur Tangzingi Baksha Shukshamo Yoba the Chick. In a Chirula Mubodi, Tawa Nangyora. The Indian Tawa Dovan Nangi, Tawa Maridi, Tawa Dovan Nangiora, Nangla, any Tangzingi Baksha Shukshamo Yore, the Bardala, Sosur to Sherap Chunda. Delatene, King Disolatine, Tangzingi Shiva the Giwara. Tawa Dovan Namadita, any Tawa email of Sosur to Sherap me, Tangzingi Baksha Shukshamo Yore, Delatine Tawa Zindogara. The Tawa Trulwarama, the Shepamara. Then the Trubadi, any king is so ball at dinner, Jumaramato, some crangy and Simares. Pedro Shana, Peshanda Shana, Tawa the Duldu Trubayora, Tawa To, Dulgi Isukabatella, Duldu Truba Kira. In a Duldu Truba Kiva didn't Negagi King Gashilatene, Dul Reyes and the Truzin Kivaramato, in Takapa Towel, Duldu Zimbadi Simkrang Rangsimara. In a Tawa Tola, Tok Belodi, in Simkrang Rangshiro. You look at it, but it Himanashi Togoro. Tipang Nisigara.
Why is it that the kleshas are superficial to mind, adventitious, and therefore removable? If we look at the root source of all the kleshas, however many they may be, the root source is the ignorance that believes in a truly existent self. This ignorance of self-clinging, of the idea of a truly existent self, is not intrinsic to mind. This is what is adventitious or superficial to mind. What is that ignorance that perceives a truly existent self, that clings to it? It is a mistaken understanding of its own object. In other words, the ignorance of the idea of a self references the self-perpetuating skandhas, and instead of perceiving them correctly as they are, it perceives the self-perpetuating skandhas as a truly existent self. In actuality, there is no truly existent self, but the ignorance of the idea of a self perceives the skandhas in that way. This ignorance is a misperception. It is not actually realizing the true nature of its object, the self-perpetuating skandhas, but perceiving it incorrectly. Once a realization of the object in its true nature is attained, the misperception dissolves. Why is that? Because the misperception is superficial to mind. It is not intrinsic to mind. It can be removed. Mind itself, its character is to be lucid and knowing. It is able, for example, to understand that what is perceived as permanent is actually impermanent, and so forth. This is intrinsic to mind. The correct understanding of things as they appear in apparent reality is something that is intrinsic to mind. So, for example, realizing that samsara is suffering in its character is a realization that is accurate and thus intrinsic to mind. The prajna that realizes that composite things, conditioned things are impermanent is intrinsic to mind. Why is that? Because it's accurate. Composite things are not permanent. This is an accurate understanding of the way things are in accord with how they appear. This is an excellent quality of mind. This is intrinsic to mind and cannot be removed. The situation is one that, under the power of given conditions, misperceptions, misunderstanding of the objects of minds can arise. So, despite the fact that conditioned things are impermanent, the ignorance that misperceives these objects takes them to be permanent. That misperception is what is not intrinsic to mind. It arises solely based on conditions. What are those conditions? The conditions consist of the very strong habitual imprints to take things to be permanent, the habituation to that, plus the situation that outer things appear to be permanent, they seem permanent, plus the weakness in the strength of our intricately discerning precise knowledge, or prajna. These three things, habitual imprints, the appearance of things that seem to be permanent, and the weakness of our intricately discerning precise knowledge is what leads to the perception of things as permanent, even though they are impermanent. This is a diluted perception, not an accurate realization. This is what is meant by diluted appearances of mind, as opposed to intrinsic qualities of mind that perceive things accurately. So what ends up happening is that there is a confusion. The traditional example is a coiled multicolored rope, which in a dark situation can be confused for a snake. Even though the confused mind takes that coiled multicolored rope in a dark corner, for example, to be a snake, that is not an intrinsic property of mind. What's intrinsic to mind is a correct realization of the rope as a rope or any other object. Mind recognizes any object in just the way it is. It is impossible to eliminate this correct realization that is the natural property of mind, this correct understanding of things as they are.
Hola, that did any Dangjin Yomova Tamjiki Dangjin Maribadi Yula Chijilo the Shube any law in Zang Pondurua, Taldurua, Lurua Imbala Yichekena. Then you remember seeing Tamjet de Tajera or the Pangna, de la Tenis when you remember seeing to the Pangre, Le Pangre, Nikawa Pangra, Lela Tenis when Kawa Pangre, or T. Nijek Yanatini, Croati, Talduruma Hisikigra, Panduruma Hisikigre. Take also the Power Jigi in Sunday. Lo tempo todo me va que quiere
This root of all kleshas, the root source of them all, is the ignorance that believes in a truly existent self. It is an incorrect understanding of its own object. Understanding that it is something that is removable, that it can be eradicated, that it is superficial to mind is extremely important. Because what that leads us to understand is that since this ignorance of the idea of a self is the origin, the very root of all kleshas, by eradicating it, all of the kleshas are immediately eradicated. Once the kleshas are eradicated, the karmic actions and the sufferings that arise based on the kleshas are also eliminated. There is an end to all of them. So this confidence that it is possible to eradicate the ignorance that believes in a truly existent self leads to the mindset that resolves with stability and irreversibly, I shall eradicate this ignorance.
Hola. Di indini ngantu dela dagi kumbulu ki sona shi. Tini korwa di pangdu runga re di ine dela pangdu magena pangya ki deba magena. Tini korwa thame re songra. Di susu kiwe jesu dangna korwa di thame re songra mare. Susu kiwe jesu dangna sidi korwa la dungal dumashe dewara tul korwa la simba gena. Ko pangdo yamaro. Ko la pangdo magedi pangdo runga yena yang pang tu maro. Di indikasu tini ko thame bare sonro. Kumbulu rugi sona shi tini tanda jangul ru thai gyang. Tadung dungal thame nyongir be sonro. Karjene Kyoshi Kijik Tamya Makebe Susuki Jesu Tangoro. Kroala Dungal du Matong, any Kishikigua Mare, Koala Devaratul, Koala Senchakigua Mado, Kroala Dungal the Shene Kishikijam and Kigua or the indicator thing as a public just Rangamidua, Suzuki just Rangadua. Or the Suzuki just Rangi Dunkari, Tadung Dungal Tamin younger bay. Then the Badu Dungal Toma Mabani Dungal Navale, Dadun Kazin Yango Grace, Jotana, Tadung Dungal Tamavan Yango Dus. Karajane Elana Dungal, Kroala Dungal Tony Kishi Kichitam and Kigimidu, Marangula.
And this
that Kishi Kichitam Yamaki was it, Karajane Chumare, Dagde Simjin Langin Tiktochen, Chicken Dambuti Sumudua.
Ladi.
Or then the laying in a dip, Tipagi dip. Then it, Dong and Buggy young dip. Narangi Thala Togo Samayang influence Tobogi, Dibi Tobogi a dip. Dibi Tobogi influence Sugora. The Narangi leg dipadang, any laying in the dip Naranga, Narangi Tobo, someone Naranga, Samlo Tumba, Chubatumba. Yodikasu, any Samagi influence the Sugora, or the end that any Kroala, Kendumatong, Nimik, Marik, Tene, Shinjaki, take it in Kroatamid Dragi, Jujigore, the Tingor.
So this is just as the Master Nagarjuna explains. It's the reasoning for why samsara is something that can be eradicated, that can be eliminated. When we understand this, we have this great wish to do so. If that wish to eradicate samsara, to eliminate it, put an end to it, does not arise, then samsara continues without end. This is what Nagarjuna mentions in this verse, where if we follow the course of ordinary beings, we are following an infinite career in samsara. That means that we confuse samsara for happiness, and as a result, develop a fixated obsession with samsara. We take it to be real as happiness. So we never do abandon it. We never even wish to. Samsara is capable of being abandoned, of being put to an end, but unless we wish to do so, we won't be able to do it. And samsara continues churning. Similar to this description by the Master Nagarjuna, in this verse, Jangan Kunchu Lodro Tai is saying that we are in this state of wandering continually throughout samsara since time without beginning, even now mired in the experience of endless suffering. This is a situation of taking a samsara to be happiness, confusing it for happiness, and thus developing a fixated attachment to it that is difficult to cease. This is not following in the footsteps of the realized beings. This is taking up a career of ordinary samsaric beings. Then why is that the case? Because delusion does not surface, even for a moment. This is what yields a situation of being mired in the experience of endless suffering and samsara. Why is that? Because in the first line, Jangan Kunchu Lodro Tai says, sentient beings such as I are wrongdoers with negative karma. What does that mean? And that means that we are obscured by the karmic obscurations arising from the kleshas. In addition to that, we are obscured by the misguided companions in our samsaric career who influence us in many different ways, increasing the obscurations of wrongdoing through karmic action, such that we start to go with the crowd. Our mindset accords with our misguided companions, as do our conduct. We are following the course of ordinary samsaric beings, and we become like them. We become one of the crowd. This yields a fixated attachment to samsara that continues its course endlessly. That is what this verse is presenting.
Hola. 다 디도더니 크로알라 대화를 툴 교시 맡겨버린 신진 착바디 크로와 크로의 등을 탐해본 용의 교인바 신이 되니 크로알라 크로와 탐해비 등을 교인바 신이 되니 그렇소 크로와 탐해비 등을 크로와라 신진 착바디 크로와 탐해비 등을 교인바 신이 되니 크로와라 신진 착바디 빵들기 삼바 깨나양 되니 깨나양 다 대등 신차디 빵네 애니 탈바드녀기로 크로와던 절외 애니 탈바드녀기로 니중 크로와라 교시에단 탈바드녀기로 고아담 마임바 식담 마임바 고아담 마임바 솔와 메비 용아템바 솔메기 용아템바직 영국이 열에 근데 데드버 용아디양 이런 것도 코알레 신차디 통면의 공부에는 공시 숙침보러 이 공도 송송
나래.
레닌 딕도 제송로 말에
나래.
니인데 레닌 받는 딕비 딥네 되니 신차디 딕비 딥의 지 공시 숙침보더니 될 때는 되니 신차디 뻥하고 미중디 깨하고 깨게 되버 얘네 아니 깨하고 어디 뭐 세리 가서 어디로든지 신사단 달링이 좀 깨야지 되니 근데스키 구거에서는 pendangara서 싱발라 차잖아
나래.
되니 싱박이 로도디 깨야라 규칙된 kiến 찍이 깨기 말어 그게 망부 속으로 니링기 규 현지제베 낀 상마 속으로 말해
나래.
아니 니랭기 규단 현지제베 낀 상나양 양 갈긴 여러내나 계속 말어 딘지 갈긴단 달 튕긴서 갈긴단 달 튕긴 상나더니 레라고 깨기로 디낭시들이 간수 니중대 찍어라 근데 니중디 깨라다 아니 갈긴 달 튕긴 상고 그래 튕긴 대안들이 튕긴라 되네 니랭기 규단 현지제베 낀 니여라 pero chasana singbi lodo de la nilengi gyudi sobendra gyuto di sobendra
나래.
teni lenji jibekin teni chuludang sadang chulu nimetre diso lenji jibekin ra 디르거든요. 니랭기 규는 hin지지백인 차상 속으로. 단 니랭기 규는 hin지지백인 차상 속에 갈긴 여러네나 근데 싱가디 나라드네 돌랩당 싱랩 망부지 강대야나. 드니 갈긴 여러네 봐라. 싱가디 땅만 매바지 돌랩 싱랩 망부지 강대바야나. 디기 고가네 서벤땀나양 로도디 깨투고 말아. 어디인데더니 싱가디 돌립 싱랩라서 갈긴 매바 싱가 짱마고 그래.
Are.
강을더니 서벤답 텔라 슈르 니메드 차상상나 되니 깨기라. 빼디로 나랑 생기중디양 되니 니링기 규저어디 걸람나 코르웨 니믹 라 퇴바제 삼바제 되니 최성기 시럽디 최성기 시럽이 도저 니라 검갑 어디라거든 최성 검비 시럽 좀 봐신 느껴거라
Are.
어디는 퇴바 삼바 검바제바디 그러면 님이 검비 당가라 퇴바 삼바 검바제바디 가르쳐 니랭기 규라오라 싱바기 니랭기 규라오래 디 규토라 이는 대점기더니 니중글게 켜봐요 말아.
Are.
디디드니 갈긴 디립 장고구라. 싱가 땅마고구도. 디르거더니 랑귤라 레잉이 디바던 디바기 딥나. 디 시럽디 야께 두고 말아. 그러게 니믹시베 시럽디 깨 두고 말아. 오 디인자더니 갈긴 디립 장고구래 예수. 추던 리 초반에 시드니 튕긴 소남기 사고래 예수. 소남기 겹되면은 양 시럽디 깨 두고 믿어.
Are.
어디인자들이 튕긴 소남기 사고 그래 예수. 다 갈긴 디립장 튕긴 소남기 사 연애양 그냥 님의 죄면은 양 계기입니다. 그냥 추던 류 연애양 님의 죄면은 계기입니다. 그냥 군가 서변답 서변 열에 추 열에 류 열에 차단 열에 이내 님의 죄면이 계기입니다. 되니 지갈랩 님의 죄디 용되고서 되니 신의 누구 계기도 빼디로 되니 나랑서 길래양 가리 구구리라면 아니 싸와던 규빌라마던 전주 선반는 게 진압 주고 그래 소리 님의 죄로 어디나지 딕딕장 선언 소 겹진 선언 소 연애양 아니 상계 전주 선반던 싸와던 규빌라마는 게 진압 맞으나 진압 그 죄되면은 되니 계기 말해 소리 냠용디 아니 최선 공비 시럽디 있더니 깨알아 깔래카보용 그래 다둥 당가라서 아니 싱비 빼들라더니 추던 류디 갈긴 정화당 튕긴 아니 갈긴 슬로와당 튕긴 되니 추던 류 저러디 그게 카갈라더니 영국으로 이내 나라서 단다 드린 들라더니 디립 정화당 라말라더니 영국으로 갈긴 디립 정화양 라말라더니 영국으로 튕긴 스남 소사와양 라말라더니 영국으로 어디에더니 진압기 드레슈거든 라말라드네 용그래 디인다더니 또 라마당 상기 전주선바 다 상기 전주선바 탐지 라말라 라마디 상기 전주선바 탐지기더니 당니라 어디인데더니 상기 전주선바 군조숨 자와숨 탐군 군조숨다 자와숨 탐지 디비 당니 이니 라마디 서사의 싱약시 디바정의 싱약시 ini jilab juge ini sing yakse gochikche odi imba shena teni gangla kyeshi keji tomya magi bade pe mese ninga sabo korwa thame de roya ge ninga yore di ha go de ni jugda ge ini kyeshi tam kyeshi kya de ne lelo mare de gyugi mambo sang go de digdib jang sonam so sa jilab juge gore 디 탐지기 따와디 라마레 디 시디 것은 되니 거래 용거래 라마 캐노 선데 깨디 레그라 라마 캐노 선데 깨디 레그래
Lade. Goodness, it's stuck here somewhere. When we mistake samsara for happiness, we'll never be with it, never be disenchanted. We'll never want to break up with it. But this is the cause for the endless suffering of samsara. When we recognize that, then that is the beginning of breaking that cycle. Otherwise, we have this fixated attachment for samsara that doesn't lead to the mindset that wants to be free of it. To develop that, what do we need? We start out by this mindset of reorienting the mind away from samsara, the mindset that urgently seeks liberation, that urgently seeks to be without samsara, to be free of it, begins with this disenchantment, this weariness, this disillusionment with samsara, but not just any disenchantment. It has to be more than mere words, more than an intellectual understanding, more than a passing feeling. It is a deep-going experiential understanding that actually gives rise to this mindset that urgently seeks liberation and that breaks the cycle of the fixated attachment of samsara. Why is that? Because our habit of being attached to samsara in this fixated way is extremely powerful. We have this very strong habit, and as explained before, that habit is one of the main conditions for giving rise to the misperception that is samsara. This itself is what makes it difficult to develop reorientation of mind, to renounce samsara. It's what makes it difficult to eradicate the fixated attachment to samsara, to even perceive samsara as faulty. This reorientation of mind that wishes to be free of the fixated attachment is something that occurs organically. It cannot be forced. We can use the example of agriculture to understand how this works. If we're working in a context of agriculture, if we're farming for a harvest, it takes a lot more than one cause and one condition to yield an abundant harvest. There are many different things involved. There is the dominant condition, the primary cause, but then there are many corresponding causes, simultaneous conditions that allow that primary cause to actually serve its purpose. In addition to that, even if you have a primary cause, even if you have simultaneous supporting conditions, if there are hindrances, conditions that are contradictory, then again, there'll be no harvest. So what this agriculture example is teaching us is we need a full set of the causes and conditions that are favorable for our harvest, and we need to eliminate all of the unfavorable conditions. When that happens, it's organic. It happens almost by itself, naturally, you would say. So that's the situation we need in our circumstances. Looking more carefully at that example, we can learn a great deal from it. The primary cause in our harvest example is the seeds of the harvest. In addition to this primary cause of the seeds, there are many supporting conditions that are simultaneous. Things like water, fertile soil, fertilizer, the warmth of the sun, and so forth. When we have the primary cause, that is the seeds of the harvest and all of these supporting conditions in place, then even if we put all those things together, If there are contradictory conditions, for example, the field is very stony, it's full of twigs and debris, even if we plant the seeds and water and fertilize the soil at the appropriate time, the hindrances in the soil will stop the seedlings from growing and no harvest will come. In our agriculture example, we need to properly prepare the field. We need to clear out all the debris. We need to fertilize it. We need to water it. We need to ensure that the warmth of the sun is at an appropriate point. When we use that example and apply it to our situation, what do we learn? When we think of this mindset of reorienting the mind from samsara and urgently seeking liberation instead, turning from samsara towards liberation, the primary cause is the listening and contemplating to the teachings on the deficiencies of samsara, its many shortcomings that yields the prajna, the precise knowledge or prajna from listening and contemplating. Once we have this prajna from listening and contemplating the teachings on the deficiencies of samsara, we are able to take that into meditation and integrate that prajna. This is necessary to do in this progressive fashion. This too is an organic process. It is out of the prajna from listening that we have the prajna from contemplating, and out of that, the prajna from meditating. And the source of all of that is the spiritual instructions on the characteristics of samsara and why they are deficient, why they are faulty. The listening and contemplating to those spiritual instructions are the principal cause for reorienting the mind towards liberation and away from samsara. But that alone is not necessarily enough. It's like just having the seed in the field. That alone does not necessarily yield a harvest. In addition, to reap the harvest of the mindset that seeks liberation with urgency, we must get rid of all of the contradictory conditions for developing the prajna that understands the failings of samsara, and we must gather all of the favorable conditions for doing so. The unfavorable conditions are the obscurations due to wrongdoing, and the favorable conditions are the gathering of merit. So without these, the precise knowledge, understanding the failings of samsara that reorients the mind to liberation will not arise. It's like having the seed in the field, but without sun. Even if we water and fertilize the field, the harvest will not come. For example, if we plant our seeds, water the field, and fertilize it in winter, the warmth of the sun is not sufficient to yield a harvest. So in this case, what we need is to align all of those things. Plant our seeds in the springtime, water it, fertilize it, remove any obstacles in the soil. This is what allows the harvest to occur naturally. In our case, how does that work? It is by the blessings of the root and lineage gurus that we are able to gather the stores of merit. It is like the warmth of the sun that allows the harvest to grow. Without that blessing, it is extremely difficult to give rise to the precise knowledge, the prajna coming from listening, contemplating, and meditating, even if we engage in those activities. Just as in our agriculture example, where water and fertilizer alone are not enough, we also have to eliminate any contradictory conditions and ensure that all of the favorable conditions are in place. We need to remove any obstacles in the soil, water the soil, irrigate it properly, fertilize it properly. Those are examples in our case for the unfavorable conditions of the obscurations due to wrongdoing. The favorable conditions are the stores of merit. The warmth of the sun symbolizes the blessings of the gurus. These are things that we can access through the guru, who is identical in character to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the three jewels, the three roots, and so forth. That means that the guru serves as the best possible field, the best possible condition for growing our harvest. In our example, there are various causes and conditions in the farming situation, and we have to gather various different things: the water, the fertilizer, the sun, the timing. All of those things are different material substances. In our case, it's quite different. It is based on the guru alone that we are able to access the blessings. With just the guru, we're able to clear away the obscurations of wrongdoing. With just the guru, we're able to gather the stores of merit. This is the value of the guru as identical in character to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When we know this, what happens? The call comes up naturally. Master, know me. Lama keno.
Hola, tiene that o Yeshe kiji tume mebadi o dungal korbe dungal thame du nyagi kyu imba dang Yeshe kia di kale khago imba shene ini kewa diang lami chilabla raleba o lazo di hago di gasu tene lama la o tugi kulwe sondebdi yungore ta tugi kuldang di gare lamna dine kimbe shi tebe tugje any o jinlab gi nitu all of the kimbatewa nibasum di kulkugure din da ne lama beba lama la bene tene ngarangi nedang kyose ke khabo makena khowa dungal thame de nyonga di tene kimbe yeshigi kimba narona dela tene tebe tugji ngarang la 공 시반 시그러낭 니버게 되니 녜기 강을디 아니 세월라 진람 나로나 되니 소아데 바래
When we are in the state described in this verse, where a disillusion does not surface, it is hard to give rise to disillusion despite wandering continually throughout samsara due to our fixated attachment to samsara and confusing it for happiness. Together with that, we understand that it is based on the blessing of the guru that we are able to give rise to this critical disillusionment that reorients the mind to liberation, that naturally puts us in the place of supplicating, invoking the enlightened mind of the guru as the embodiment of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. How are we invoking that enlightened mind? Again, we are invoking the non-dual wisdom of the Guru's knowledge, the great compassion of the Guru's affectionate love, and the blessing through the Guru's power. Through these three together, we cry out, Lama, Guru, Master. We are saying, please see my dreadful situation, how difficult it is to develop disenchantment with samsara because of this fixated attachment I have. Please know me with your non-dual wisdom. Please behold me with your great compassion and affectionate love. Please grant me the blessing that I be able to be free of these dreadful difficulties. I supplicate you, please grant this blessing.
Hola. That digidine any chilab di kare nam gore lamna ngijung ting ni gyo singi los ta ngijung senna tanda ni yore koala tande dang tharba thamde ti koala kyoshe ki talde dang tharbe yindin thone te thamje gi samba o ni chodala ngijung sigre Nijung sidi kyowa chibu mare kyowa dang gawa ni dewe sarang re kowa dunga tong dele kyowa dang dele daldu runga dang tharba tobrunga imba shene ene tharba tobala gawa tarba torungi ba shebe kawadang eni kowala nimik tu toni dini kyoshe dang taljogi samba ni tsoba di nijung segre 데려고 nijung di tingni kyawar jingi lo sidi kosida nijung chedan tenpa kiyala chilam naro naas chedan tenpa sana nijung di eni nijung di nyamnyung di dini tolmegi nyonga tenpa 배들 제목고 봐 영화 숙지 못해도 봐 어떤데 중나 되는 게 좀 세던데 봐 저기도 와 어떤데 이게 좀 기야라 지나노로 나왔어
What precise blessing are we asking for in this verse? That is stated in the last line. Bless me that renunciation, reorientation of mind, arise from my inmost steps. And that is the blessing we are requesting in this supplication. And this renunciation or reorientation of mind has two parts to it. There is this disillusionment with samsara and wish to be free of it on one hand, but there is also seeing the excellent qualities of liberation as a counterpoint and the mindset that wishes to attain that. So we are literally reorienting the mind. Disillusionment with the deficiencies of samsara turns us towards the excellent qualities of liberation. And these two mindsets, wishing to be free of samsara and wishing to attain liberation, is what is called renunciation or reorientation of mind. It is not just disillusionment alone. There is the wish to be free of samsara, the necessity of it, and an understanding of the ability to do so, together with the wish to attain a liberation, the necessity of that, and the understanding of the ability to do that. This comes up out of the understanding of the deficiencies of samsara and understanding the excellent qualities of liberation. This is the reorientation of mind that we wish for. We are asking for the blessing that this particular reorientation of mind arise from our inmost steps in a completely fully qualified way. What does that mean, fully qualified? What does it mean, authentic? This is a reorientation of mind that is experiential in quality. It is an effortless experience that does not require any activation, that happens spontaneously. An experience that yearns to be free of samsara and to attain liberation due to seeing the deficiencies of the first and the qualities of the rest of the other. This is the fully qualified reorientation of mind. This is the one. That's the one we ask. Please grant me the blessing that I develop this reorientation of mind in all its respects.
나서 다 드링 대셔그래 이내한다 나라 저 몽고 여르디 이내한데 드링 주스디 소송 오 상인들네 저하기 랭캡토에게 베드지기 드링 저하기 랭캡토마서
Nari.
드링 대샤나 대들 투숨 되게 계획사와디 랑신 숨진 탐제도 투몽드제 랑신 숨진 탐제 오 예중 날마 줄게네 탈바당 탐제 김베 람라 도도 메베 준비스 준비 도도 메베 거네 람 계징 민영 공도 별대 탈바 탐제 김바 투베 제동화도 몰람기 탐제 나오르쇼
We'll stop there for today as our time has passed now. I've received many questions, but there wasn't time to answer them today. I will do what I can to answer those tomorrow. For now, please gather together all of the roots of virtue that have come from this listening and contemplating the genuine Dharma and dedicate them to ourselves and all beings in a similar situation, that we and all beings may activate and suffuse our mind streams with authentic reorientation of mind, and by means of a powerful enthusiasm of diligence, traverse the path to liberation and omniscience in an irreversible fashion. And please make the aspiration and dedication prayers that this may happen.
Thank you, Khenpo.
Have a nice day.
Sechana, Drupon Kampala, Sejanago.